Today's topic is turn of the century hope and despair. We will be looking at the many changes that take place as we move from the late Victorian era to the beginning of the modern era. These changes provided people with a lot of hope, but also, as these hopes are not realized, a lot of despair. It all begins in 1850 with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, which is the move from cottage industries to mass production. Britain had a unique set of advantages that other countries did not have at the time, so these advantages made it possible for the Industrial Revolution to start there. First, they had the ability to travel to every corner of the world due to its strong navy. This provided them with unlimited access to raw materials and markets to sell finished goods. This also provided them with cheap labor abroad. Second, they also had raw materials and cheap labor at home. They also had national wealth to invest in new industries. Finally, they had a stable government, which meant that they could focus on the economy instead of rebellions and/or revolutions, unlike that of some of its competitors. Many new inventions and discoveries would lead to multiple other inventions and industries. For example, the discovery of electricity makes possible anything that runs on electricity. Just think about the multitude of items you own that run on electricity. When in 1903, the Wright brothers' first flight was successful, it seemed that the possibilities were endless. Pause the lecture and click on the words 1903 first flight to view a short video of this flight. The Industrial Revolution unites the world's economies for better or worse, and we can apply the term globalization for the first time. This leads to industrialized nations seeking profit by collecting colonies to provide the raw materials, cheap labor, and markets to sell goods. Whatever country had the most colonies had an unlimited supply of wealth, or so they thought, and was considered to be the best. The Industrial Revolution brought about many societal changes, especially the growth of cities or urbanization. Many people flocked to the cities from rural areas seeking a different life than that of their ancestors. The Industrial Revolution brought them hope that they would not have to be a potato farmer as their father had and their grandfather had, and so on. One of the new groups of people that emerged from the Industrial Revolution was the middle class. These were mostly men and a few women who did not rely on land ownership for wealth as the aristocracy had for many centuries. Wealth could be achieved by capitalist ventures, entrepreneurship, or skilled labor. Doctors, lawyers, architects, factory owners, shipping magnates were all part of the growing middle class. This moves Europe from a caste system to a class system. One of the major improvements most industrialized nations made was an expansion of education. Compulsory elementary education or government provided K through 6 education for all of its citizens. While this was definitely an improvement where before mostly only the upper middle classes were educated, it did not guarantee education for all. The lower classes often needed their children to work before child labor laws, and so the children certainly were not going to school. Nevertheless, this became a cornerstone of industrialized nations. Likewise, voting rights were also expanded. Universal male suffrage also would become a cornerstone of industrialized nations. Sadly, women would have to wait until after World War I, and the suffragette movement caused much civil unrest at the turn of the century. While the standard of living improved for most people during the Industrial Revolution, for the working poor it was a constant struggle. Overcrowding in the cities meant housing was scarce, and no shortage of labor meant few guarantees of jobs. People lived in tenement houses, with one family sharing a single-room apartment. Factory work was dangerous, and access to health care was limited. Tenement houses often lacked proper heating, ventilation, and plumbing. With several people packed in the housing like sardines, working hard and getting paid low wages, food was difficult to come by. So if one person got sick, it was likely to spread quickly. There were many outbreaks of cholera and typhus and other communicable diseases. Life in the slums was hard, and many despaired or turned to alcoholism and/or crime. This is a map of Western Europe from around 1850. As you can see, industrialization has spread to the continent, but is only pervasive in Western Europe. Southern and Eastern Europe tended to lag behind, and many peoples in those areas, especially Russia, resented it. Linen, cotton, silk, iron, and wool were major products of the Industrial Revolution, and coal was the chief source of fuel. Now we will look at the political changes in what we call the decline of the old order. When we refer to the old order, we are referring to hereditary monarchies, which is what most European governments still were. Those that supported the monarchy were considered conservatives and were mostly the aristocracy and upper middle class. And those that wanted more of a voice in their government were considered liberal and made up of the middle and lower classes. Socialism, first proposed by two German men, Friedrich Engels and Karl Marx, threatened the conservative way of life. Marx and Engels believed that capitalism created a huge disparity between the rich and poor. If governments wanted a basic standard of living for all peoples, then a classless society needed to emerge. They believed the wealthy would not give up their wealth willingly, and so a revolution in which the proletariat, or working class, needed to overthrow the bourgeoisie, or wealthy class, to make it happen. It is important to note that in 1848, it was mostly an intellectual movement with very few members. But as the 19th century ended and a new one began, socialism has grown as quickly as the cities that employed them, and it threatened the old economic and political order. Not only were there changes taking place in the types of governments in Europe, but also the makeup of the ethnic groups within European empires was changing. Nationalism both unified and divided the people of Europe. In both Germany and Italy in the 1870s, the individual areas of each region united themselves around a common language and culture. Both found common enemies and united their peoples through war, the last of those wars being the Franco-Prussian War that led to animosity between the two countries that lasted to the mid-20th century. Nationalism divided the Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian empires by mid-19th century. The Serbians, Greeks, and Romanians all becoming independent and lessening the strength of those empires. Meanwhile, in the Western Hemisphere, many colonial governments are overthrown in South America, weakening Spain's empire. And in the US and Canada, when they industrialize, their economies give Western Europe some competition. Thus, both the balance of power in Europe shifts politically and economically. As the global socioeconomic and geopolitical systems change dramatically, it should come as no surprise that people in intellectual and cultural pursuits would begin to question their own bodies of knowledge. In physics, the very foundation of Newton's laws are shaken to the core when Max Planck, Niels Bohr, and Albert Einstein develop new theories. In particular, Einstein's theory of relativity makes us question, what is reality? Pause the lecture and click on the link to view a short video explaining relativity. Another scientist who would change Enlightenment ideas of rationalization and reason is Sigmund Freud, the father of psychology. In 1905, he gives us the concepts of the subconscious and unconscious mind as an explanation for why humans do things, but they do not know why they did. He believed there was a mental activity that we are unaware of, the subconscious, which could be uncovered, and the unconscious, which could not. In the world of literature, the shift away from romanticized writing to more, quote, realistic or socially conscious writing is exemplified by Émile Zola and other naturalist writers. Zola explored the darker changes that took place, or the despair, during the Industrial Revolution. Alcoholism, life in the slums, life in the coal mines, anti-Semitism were all themes in his writing. In the world of art, the shift is the opposite than that in literature. It goes away from realistic or photographic types of paintings to the abstract. We will explore three types of abstract art that were popular at the turn of the century. Impressionism uses the interplay of light and shadows. Claude Monet, a French painter, is one of Impressionism's most famous artists. Here are two of his most famous paintings, La Promenade on the left and Water Lilies on the right. Although Water Lilies is more famous of the two paintings, the light and shadows is more pronounced in La Promenade. Take a moment to jot down what you see in these paintings. Pause the lecture if necessary. Expressionism uses color and distorted shapes to evoke emotion. Edvard Munch's The Scream is on the title slide of this presentation, and Van Gogh's Starry Night on the next slide. What is the dominant color here? What emotions are associated with blue? What are the distorted shapes in the sky? The black thing on the left foreground of the painting. What might they represent in relation to the town with the church in its center? Pause the lecture to reflect on these questions. Another expressionist painter is the German Ludwig Meidner, who painted Apocalyptic Landscape in 1913, just 1 year before the outbreak of the Great War. What colors are dominant here? How does this differ from the other two paintings? What elements are similar? Pause the lecture to write down your reflections. Here is Starry Night set beside Apocalyptic Landscape, both expressionist painters, both with a vision that questions reality, much like Einstein's and Freud's works. The two paintings side by side represent the before and after of the Great War. Do you see it? The last of the artistic movements is Cubism. It is inspired by African art and attempts to make the three-dimensional into the two-dimensional. It is characterized by straight lines as seen in Picasso's 1907 self-portrait. The painting on the right, painted in 1913 by Picasso, takes two 3D objects and attempts to paint them from every perspective in 2D. What 3D objects do you think he is painting? Pause the lecture to reflect. If you see strings instruments, you're on the right track. The title is Violin and Guitar. In conclusion, the Industrial Revolution brought about many political, social, economic, and intellectual changes at the turn of the century. These changes, for better or worse, laid the foundation for the modern world.